On our wedding night he handed me the guest room key. Mom says the master bedroom is hers. She chose my dress, cut our guest list, even posed as hostess at our reception. I wasn't allowed to hang a photo, cook in her kitchen, or speak at family dinners. A year later I handed her an eviction notice, signed by her husband. I didn't raise my voice. I just rose. The key felt cold and foreign in my palm as I stared at it in disbelief. The small brass object weighed heavier than my diamond ring, heavier than the wedding vows we'd exchanged just hours before. Mom's already asleep. Her back's been acting up, Zach explained casually, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. His eyes avoided mine, focused instead on a point somewhere over my shoulder. She needs her rest. I stood frozen in the hallway of what was supposed to be our home, still wearing my wedding gown. The makeup that had been meticulously applied at dawn was now fading, my carefully styled hair falling loose around my shoulders. My high heels dangled from my fingertips, removed during our awkward, silent car ride from the reception. Joanna had claimed the master bedroom, our bedroom. The room where I'd imagined starting my married life. This is a joke, right? I whispered, my voice barely audible in the dark hallway. Zach's expression remained blank. It's just for tonight. You know how she gets when her back flares up. But I knew better. I'd seen Joanna's suitcases arrive yesterday, watched her unpack her clothes into the master closet while directing movers where to place her personal furniture. At the time I'd thought it was temporary, just for the wedding preparations. Now the truth crashed down around me like shattered crystal. The dress I wore hadn't even been my choice. Joanna had taken over the bridal appointment, dismissing the fitted lace gown I'd fallen in love with. Too revealing, she declared with a tight smile. Instead she'd selected this plain, high-necked monstrosity that hung like a tent on my frame. Modesty is timeless, she'd insisted, while the bridal consultant shot me sympathetic glances. Zach had said nothing then, just as he said nothing now. I thought back to the reception, how different it had been from everything I'd dreamed. My college roommate Sarah had texted that morning, "Can't wait to see you. So excited to celebrate." But she never arrived. Neither did my childhood friend Megan, nor my coworkers, nor my cousins from Seattle. Budget cuts, Zach had explained with an apologetic shrug when I questioned the half-empty reception hall. Only later did I discover that Joanna had personally called them, informing each that the wedding had become an intimate family affair. And then there was Joanna herself, dressed in cream-colored silk that was almost white, greeting guests at the door as if she were the bride. "Welcome to our celebration," she'd announced to each arrival. "I'm Joanna, mother of the house. Mother of the house. Not mother of the groom." She'd commandeered the microphone during the reception, delivering a 20-minute speech about raising Zach, about the family legacy, about traditions that must be maintained. When the DJ attempted to pass the microphone to me for a few words of thanks, Joanna had smoothly intercepted it, declaring it was time for the first dance. A dance that she initiated with her son while I stood awkwardly to the side, watching my husband waltz with another woman on my wedding day. Now here I was, being directed to a guest room in what was supposed to be my home. A home where Joanna had already established her dominance. The walls were bare of any photos I'd selected. The furniture arranged according to her preferences. Even the kitchen, which I'd so eagerly anticipated making our own, was strictly off-limits. "Zach likes his meals prepared a certain way," she'd informed me earlier that week. "Best to leave the cooking to someone who knows his tastes." I looked at my husband now, searching for some sign of discomfort, some acknowledgement that this situation was abnormal. But his face remained placid, unbothered. "When do we get to be married?" I asked quietly, still clutching the guest room key. His expression hardened slightly. "Don't start, Chelsea. Let's not upset her. You're being difficult. Difficult. For wanting to sleep beside my husband on our wedding night. For wanting to feel like this was my home too." Zach leaned forward, pressed a quick kiss to my forehead, the kind of kiss you give a child, and turned away. "Get some rest. I'll see you in the morning." I watched him retreat down the hallway, not to another guest room but to the living room couch. Even he wouldn't claim the space next to his mother. Yet neither would he stand beside me. The guest room was impersonal and cold, decorated in beige and cream with generic landscape paintings on the walls. I closed the door behind me, finally allowing my shoulders to slump. My wedding dress caught on the edge of the bed as I sank down onto the unfamiliar mattress. With mechanical movements, I began removing the pins from my hair, placing them one by one on the nightstand. I unzipped the dress I never wanted, stepping out of it and hanging it carefully in the closet. A closet devoid of any other clothes. I hadn't even been allowed to move my things in advance. I sat on the edge of the bed in my slip, staring at my reflection in the small vanity mirror across the room. I looked like a stranger to myself, diminished somehow, faded around the edges. The woman who had walked down the aisle that morning already seemed like a different person, one who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. But as I stared at my reflection, something else flickered in my eyes. Something hard and resolute. I didn't cry. Not a single tear. Instead, I methodically washed my face, brushed my teeth with the complimentary toothbrush left for guests, and slipped between the cold sheets of the unfamiliar bed. Lying in the darkness, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing and yet oddly clear. This wasn't at all what I had imagined marriage would be. This wasn't partnership or love or respect. This was training. Joanna was training me to be small, to be obedient, to accept scraps of affection and space. And Zach was complicit, too weak or too comfortable to challenge the status quo. But as I lay there in the guest room of what should have been my marital home, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not cry. I would not beg. I would not plead with Zach to choose me over his mother. Instead, I would watch. I would learn. I would understand exactly how this household operated, and then I would change it. Because I refused to stay domesticated. I refused to be the obedient daughter-in-law, grateful for whatever scraps of autonomy I was thrown. Tomorrow I would wake up as a different woman. A woman with a plan. My wedding night may have been spent alone in a guest room, but I swore it would be the last night I ever felt invisible in my own life. Morning arrived with the sound of Joanna's voice outside my door. Not knocking, just talking loudly enough to wake me. "Breakfast is at 7:30 sharp," she announced to Zach in the hallway. Chelsea should dress appropriately. No loungewear at the table. I'd been married exactly 12 hours and already there was a dress code for breakfast. When I emerged from the guest room wearing jeans and a sweater, Joanna's smile tightened slightly. "We dress for breakfast in this house, dear. Perhaps tomorrow you could wear something more presentable." I glanced at Zach, who was absorbed in his phone. He wore sweatpants. The kitchen gleamed with spotless perfection. Every appliance had its place, every surface scrubbed to an unnatural shine. Joanna moved through it with military precision, placing 3 identical plates at the table. "Egg whites and whole grain toast," she announced, sliding a plate before me. "No butter. Zach needs to watch his cholesterol." My husband had perfect cholesterol. I'd gone with him to his last physical. "I usually have coffee first thing," I ventured. "Caffeine disrupts hormonal balance," Joanna replied without looking up. "There's herbal tea in the cabinet. The green tin, not the blue. The blue is for digestive issues." She slid a small glass dish toward me containing 2 capsules and a vitamin. "Take these with water, not juice. The acidity interferes with absorption." I stared at the pills. "What are these?" "Just a women's multivitamin and some supplements for feminine health." The way she emphasized feminine made it sound like a disease. This became our routine. Each morning, Joanna would dictate what I should eat when I should eat it, and which supplements would fix whatever she had decided was wrong with me that day. "Your complexion looks dry. Fish oil capsules today. Your posture is slouching. Calcium and magnesium. You seem irritable. Must be hormonal imbalance." I began discreetly disposing of the pills in napkins. The rules extended beyond meals. When I tried to hang a framed photo from our honeymoon, one of the few times we'd escaped Joanna's presence, she intercepted me in the hallway. "We don't put personal photos in common areas," she informed me. "It creates visual clutter." Every wall in the house featured Joanna's taste. Landscape paintings in heavy gilt frames, formal portraits of Zach through various ages, and ancestral photographs of relatives I'd never meet. Nothing recent, nothing warm, nothing that included me. One afternoon I left our wedding portrait on the entryway table. Silver-framed, professional, perfectly acceptable by any standard. By morning it had vanished. I searched everywhere, finally discovering it buried in a drawer beneath guest linens. A yellow sticky note clung to the glass. "Too modern. Lacks sophistication." Did you see what your mother did? I asked Zach that evening. He sighed as if I'd mentioned a minor inconvenience like rain on a picnic. She's particular about decor. Just put it in the guest room. He still couldn't call it our room, this space where I lived like a long-term visitor. Even communication with the outside world fell under Joanna's domain. When I wrote an email to Zach's extended family thanking them for wedding gifts, Joanna somehow intercepted the draft. I took the liberty of making a few adjustments, she said, showing me her completely rewritten version on her tablet. Family correspondence reflects on all of us. My warm, personal message had been transformed into a formal, cold paragraph that sounded nothing like me. For Zach's birthday, I spent hours selecting a card with the perfect message, adding my own heartfelt note inside. The next morning, I found Joanna at the kitchen table with my card open before her, a pen in hand. "What are you doing?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Just adding warmth," she replied without looking up. "Your note was somewhat clinical." She had crossed out entire lines of my message and inserted her own thoughts, as if my feelings for my own husband needed translation. I snatched the card from her hands. "Don't touch my things." For once her polite mask slipped. "Everything in this house is my concern." Dinners became exercises in strategic placement. No matter the arrangement, Joanna always maneuvered herself between Zach and me. If I sat beside him, she would create a reason to switch, needing help with serving, claiming the light bothered her eyes, insisting certain chairs were better for her back. Even conversations were controlled. If I began telling Zach about my day, Joanna would interject with questions that derailed my story. If I mentioned work achievements, she would immediately pivot to Zach's childhood accomplishments. "Chelsea's department exceeded their quarterly goals," I would say. "That reminds me of when Zachary won the state science fair in 4th grade. She would counter, effectively silencing me. When I suggested hosting a game night with friends, hoping to create some normalcy, Joanna's response was swift. "Don't be silly. We're grown-ups," she said with a dismissive wave. "Besides, board games harbor bacteria." Zach merely chuckled at her response. "She's a bit much, but that's just how she is." Just how she is. The phrase that excused every boundary violation, every control tactic, every subtle humiliation. Every request I made was reframed as immaturity. Every boundary I attempted to establish was dismissed as selfishness. Every decision I tried to make independently was corrected for my own good. "I'm concerned about your work hours," she said when I stayed late at the office, the only place I had autonomy. "Are you sure that haircut suits your face shape?" she asked when I changed my appearance without consultation. "Zach prefers the chicken prepared my way," she insisted when I attempted to cook dinner. Her control was relentless but always wrapped in concern, always disguised as helpful guidance. The psychological exhaustion was more effective than locks on doors. After 3 months of this subtle warfare, I began documenting everything. A small journal hidden between the mattress and box spring became my secret record. Names, dates, exact words. Evidence of a systematic campaign to minimize my existence. I recorded how many times Joanna interrupted me at dinner, 17 in one meal. How many decisions were countermanded, 32 in a week. How often Zach sided with her instead of me, every single time. The journal became my sanity, my proof that I wasn't imagining things, that this psychological dismantling was real and deliberate. 6 months into our marriage, while searching for a missing cufflink in Zach's desk, I discovered a folded document tucked beneath warranty cards and old receipts. Curiosity made me unfold it, and what I found changed everything. It was the deed to the house, the family heirloom Joanna claimed ancestral rights to. The property had been purchased just 5 years ago with Zach as the sole owner. Joanna's name appeared nowhere on the document. The house wasn't hers. This kingdom she ruled with iron certainty had no legal foundation. I carefully replaced the document exactly as I'd found it and closed the drawer, but my mind was racing. All this time, Joanna had been ruling a domain she had no claim to, and Zach had allowed it. I stood in the center of the house, this battleground where I'd been systematically diminished, and felt something shift inside me. A clarity I hadn't possessed before. She didn't own this kingdom, and I was done playing the servant. The discovery of the deed changed my strategy entirely. That night I lay awake planning my next steps. Direct confrontation would only strengthen Joanna's position. She thrived on emotional outbursts she could label as unstable behavior. I needed something more effective than anger. I needed information, leverage, legal standing. The following morning I stopped asking questions. Instead I watched and documented. At breakfast I smiled and accepted the daily vitamin ritual without comment. When Joanna rearranged the kitchen cabinets for the third time that month, I simply observed which items she prioritized and which she hid away. I noted how she always handled the household mail first, sorting through everything before distributing it. By week's end I'd established a pattern. Joanna checked our joint account statement every Friday afternoon while Zach played golf. She always used his home office computer, always left the banking tab open, always took precisely 45 minutes. So the following Friday I installed a small program on the computer before leaving for work. Nothing invasive, just a keystroke recorder that would email me a transcript of everything typed during that time window. What I discovered was illuminating. Joanna had been systematically transferring small amounts, $300 here, $425 there, from our joint account into what appeared to be her personal account. The amounts were carefully calculated to fall just below Zach's notice threshold. Most were labeled as household expenses or family obligations in the transaction notes. Over 8 months of marriage, she diverted nearly $12,000 of our money. The transactions coincided perfectly with her spa memberships, luxury shopping sprees, and extended lunch dates with friends at exclusive restaurants. Expenses she'd claimed were covered by her personal savings. More disturbing were the documents I found bearing Zach's signature. Documents he'd never mentioned. Insurance policies, investment reallocations, even a power of attorney form that gave Joanna access to accounts that should have been solely in his name. "Did you sign anything for your mother recently?" I asked casually one evening while we watched TV. Zach barely looked up. "Maybe. She handles that stuff. Less paperwork for me." "She's really good with signatures," I remarked. "Yeah, she's organized." He missed my meaning entirely. I arranged to work late the following Thursday, knowing Joanna attended her weekly bridge club. Instead of going to the office, I drove to a small law firm 40 minutes away, far enough that I wouldn't encounter any of Joanna's extensive social network. The estate attorney, Ms. Riviera, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened without interruption as I laid out my situation. I showed her copies of the banking records, photographs of the house deed, and my detailed journal of Joanna's domestic regime. "So your mother-in-law has no legal claim to the property, yet exercises complete control over the household," she summarized. "Correct. And your husband enables this behavior?" "He was raised in it. He doesn't see it as abnormal." Ms. Riviera leaned back. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve, Mrs. Mitchell?" I thought carefully before answering. "I want what's legally mine as a spouse. Equal say in my own home. Financial security that can't be undermined. And I want my husband to make a choice. Our marriage or his mother's control." She nodded, making notes. "The property situation is straightforward. As Zach's spouse, you have certain rights regarding the marital home, regardless of whose name is on the deed. The financial diversion is more complicated but potentially actionable." I left with a comprehensive understanding of my legal position and a carefully outlined strategy. Knowledge is power, but timing is everything. Rather than confronting Joanna immediately, I began laying groundwork. First, I opened a separate bank account at a different institution. Each payday, I diverted half my income into this private account, never mentioning it to either Zach or Joanna. Next, I enrolled in an online certificate program in property law and spousal rights, studying late at night in the guest room that remained my bedroom. Understanding the legal framework would protect me from Joanna's inevitable counterattacks. On the surface, however, I changed nothing. I continued baking cookies for dinner parties where I barely spoke. I smiled at Joanna's backhanded compliments about my appearance. I nodded politely when she rearranged furniture I had straightened. "Your hair looks almost professional today," she'd say. "Thank you," I'd reply without argument. "Perhaps next time use the good plates for company," she'd suggest after I'd spent hours preparing dinner. "Of course," I'd agree, never revealing my irritation. Each night, I updated my journal with new incidents, new financial discrepancies, new evidence of the psychological minefield I navigated daily. I began working progressively later hours, volunteering for special projects that required evening commitments. This served multiple purposes: additional income for my separate account, professional advancement that strengthened my independence, and legitimate reasons to be absent from Joanna's domain. After several weeks of my modified schedule, Joanna confronted me in the kitchen one morning. "You're never around anymore," she observed, eyes narrowed slightly. "Zach mentions how late you've been working." I arranged my features into an expression of earnest concern. "I'm trying to make myself useful, contributing to our household. Your primary contribution should be here," she replied, gesturing to the immaculate kitchen she wouldn't allow me to cook in. "A wife's place is in the home." "You're absolutely right," I agreed, watching her suspicion dissolve into self-satisfaction. "I'll try to do better." I didn't change my schedule at all. But now she believed I was appropriately intimidated. Meanwhile, I was building, not just a financial safety net or legal knowledge, but a comprehensive exit strategy. Not from my marriage necessarily, but from the power structure Joanna had created. I documented which household items were purchased with joint funds versus Joanna's mysterious separate accounts. I photographed each room, establishing a record of the home's condition and contents. I carefully noted which furniture had been in the house before our marriage and which had been added since. One afternoon, I discovered a file of old correspondence in Zach's office. Letters between him and his father, dating back several years. They revealed a strained relationship, not between father and son but between husband and wife. Zach's father, though physically present until his death 2 years ago, had been emotionally absent, beaten down by decades of Joanna's control tactics. "Your mother has strong opinions," one letter read. "Sometimes it's easier to let her have her way. But remember, son, the house is yours when I'm gone. I've arranged it that way specifically." The letter confirmed what I'd suspected. Zach's father had intentionally left the property to his son alone, an act of quiet rebellion against Joanna's domain. I had a plan forming now. One Joanna would never see coming, precisely because she underestimated me. She saw my politeness as weakness, my silence as submission, my careful documentation as merely obsessive housekeeping. She never suspected I was building a case, establishing legal standing, creating financial independence. Because she still thought I was scared of her. She interpreted my quiet compliance as defeat, not recognizing the strategic patience behind my smile. She didn't know I was already 2 steps ahead, moving pieces into position for a checkmate she couldn't anticipate. I was done being a guest in my own marriage, my own home. I was becoming the landlord. After 3 weeks of meticulous preparation, I selected a date, October 15th. A Tuesday. Joanna's bridge club was cancelled that week due to renovations at the community center, ensuring she'd be home. Zach would be off from work for a dental appointment in the afternoon. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. 2 days before, I'd finalized everything with Ms. Riviera. The legal documents were impeccable. A formal eviction notice with all proper citations of state property law, a detailed accounting of financial improprieties, and a cease and desist regarding any further unauthorized use of joint funds. "Are you certain you want to proceed this way?" Ms. Riviera had asked, her expression carefully neutral. "It will create significant family tension." "The tension already exists," I replied. "I'm just bringing it into the open where it can be resolved." The courier service was scheduled for 7 a.m. prompt delivery, early enough that Joanna wouldn't have fully armored herself for the day, but not so early that she could claim harassment. The night before, I barely slept. Not from anxiety but from a strange, electric anticipation. After nearly a year of calculated submission, of documenting and planning and building my case, the confrontation I'd engineered was finally at hand. I rose at 5:30 a.m., showered and dressed with particular care, a crisp blue button-down, tailored black pants and low heels. Professional attire. Battle armor. I applied minimal makeup, pulled my hair back into a sleek ponytail and fastened small pearl earrings, a wedding gift from my parents. By 6:45, I had brewed coffee and was seated at the kitchen table with my laptop open, reviewing work emails as though it were any ordinary morning. The house was still quiet. Joanna typically emerged at 7:30, Zach closer to 8 o'clock. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:10 a.m. I remained seated, taking a deliberate sip of coffee. The doorbell rang again. I heard shuffling from the master bedroom, then Joanna's voice, sharp with irritation. Who on earth is calling at this hour? Footsteps approached the front door. Joanna in her silk robe, hair still in curlers, face creased with sleep and annoyance. I angled my chair slightly to observe the entry hallway while pretending to focus on my screen. She pulled open the door. Yes. The courier, a young woman in a navy uniform, consulted her tablet. Delivery for Joanna Mitchell? That's me, Joanna replied, her voice softening slightly. She'd always modulated her tone for strangers, maintaining the facade of genteel respectability. Sign here, please. The courier extended her electronic tablet. Joanna scrawled her signature, accepted the crisp manila envelope, and closed the door. She examined the delivery, turning it over in her hands as she walked toward the kitchen. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. You're up early. I smiled. Big day at work. Joanna glanced at the return address label on the envelope, her brow furrowing. Rivera and Associates Legal Services? What is this? Why don't you open it and find out? I suggested, my voice neutral. She slid her finger beneath the flap, extracted the documents, and began reading. I watched as comprehension dawned across her face. Confusion, disbelief, then mounting anger. Her hands began to tremble. What is this? I set down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. It's a formal eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. Your name isn't on the deed. This is my home, she shrieked, color flooding her face. No, I replied calmly. You've just been squatting with a dominant personality. The sound of Joanna's raised voice brought Zach stumbling from the guest bedroom, hair disheveled, still in his pajamas. What's going on? Your wife has lost her mind, Joanna sputtered, thrusting the papers toward him. Read this. Zach blinked, confused. Chelsea, what are you doing? Correcting the power imbalance, I said simply. He skimmed the document, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. You're kicking my mom out? I'm removing someone who's made my life unlivable, I clarified. The house is in your name. I just filed the motion. Joanna turned to her son, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. Tears I'd never seen before, not even at the funeral of her husband. Zach, you can't let her do this. This is my home. Our family home. It's not, I countered, rising from my chair. The deed is solely in Zach's name. The property was transferred to him by his father 5 years ago. I turned to Zach. Did you know your mother has been claiming ownership of a house that legally belongs to you alone? Zach's eyes darted between us, confusion evident. Dad left it to me, but Mom's always lived here. It's her home too. By courtesy, not by right, I replied. A courtesy she's never extended to me, despite my legal standing as your wife. Joanna's panic was transforming into rage. Her facade of control crumbled completely as she realized the extent of what was happening. You manipulated him. You dug through private papers. You schemed behind our backs. I documented everything, I replied, voice level. All your unauthorized spending from our joint account. Your interference in every aspect of our marriage. Your systematic campaign to isolate and diminish me in my own home. It's all there in the filing, with dates, amounts, and witnesses. After everything I've done for you, she hissed, switching tactics. Taking you into my home, guiding you, teaching you how to be a proper wife. Gratitude is earned, not demanded, I cut her off. And this was never your home to take me into. She turned to Zach, her final bastion of support. Are you going to let her do this to your mother? Your own flesh and blood. For the first time since I'd known him, Zach didn't immediately leap to her defense. He stood in the hallway, the eviction notice hanging limply from his hand, gaze shifting between the two women before him. His silence was deafening. In that moment, the power dynamic that had defined our household for a year visibly shifted. Joanna, sensing her son's hesitation, let out a sound between a gasp and a sob. She snatched the papers from his hand and stormed toward the master bedroom, the room that had never been mine despite my marriage certificate. The door slammed with enough force to rattle the pictures on the wall. One fell, the glass cracking as it hit the floor, a formal portrait of Joanna in younger days. Zach stood frozen, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. You really did this? Without talking to me first? Would you have listened? I asked quietly. Or would you have warned her, defended her, convinced me to endure another year of psychological warfare in my own home? He had no answer. I picked up my coffee cup and returned to my seat at the kitchen table. She has 30 days to find alternative arrangements. The documentation includes a full accounting of funds she's diverted from our account, funds she'll need to repay. There's also a cease and desist regarding any further unauthorized use of your name on legal documents. What do you expect me to do? He asked, voice hollow. I expect you to decide what matters more, your marriage or your mother's control. I took a sip of coffee, now lukewarm. You have 30 days to figure that out too. He ran his hands through his hair, turned and walked back to the guest bedroom without another word. From the master bedroom came the sounds of drawers being yanked open, items thrown haphazardly. Joanna's meltdown was in full swing. I remained at the table, outwardly calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. For the first time in our marriage, I had seized control of the narrative. I had reclaimed space in a house where I'd been systematically erased. Joanna had 30 days to vacate. Zach had 30 days to choose. And I, for once, had the floor plan and the upper hand. The day after the eviction notice, Zach left for work without speaking to me. When he returned that evening, he attempted to act as though nothing significant had happened, as if the legal documents, his mother's rage, and the fundamental shift in our household were merely a minor domestic disturbance that would soon blow over. He found me in the living room, laptop open, reviewing work presentations. Hey, he said casually, loosening his tie. Want to order takeout tonight? I looked up, studying his face. He was aiming for normalcy, desperate to avoid confrontation. Your mother's been packing all day, I replied. She broke the mirror in the hallway bathroom. He winced slightly. She'll calm down. Just needs time to process. Process what? That her illegal occupation of your property is ending. He sank onto the couch opposite me. You could have warned me about all this. I did, I said quietly. Dozens of times over the past year. Every time I told you I was unhappy, every time I asked for space or respect or simply to be acknowledged in my own home. That's different. He ran his hands through his hair. You didn't say you were planning to kick my mother out with legal papers. Would you have supported me if I had? His silence was answer enough. You could have gone easier on her, he finally said. Given her more time to adjust. She didn't go easy on me when she erased my voice for a year. I closed my laptop. She didn't give me time to adjust when she took over our wedding, our home, our marriage. Zach's expression darkened. He had expected me to apologize, to soften, to cave as I always had before. Instead, he found himself facing a woman who would no longer bend. He sulked for the next few days, alternating between strained politeness and wounded silence. He began spending evenings at a local bar, returning home with the scent of whiskey clinging to his clothes. I wasn't looking for comfort or validation from him. Those needs had withered months ago, replaced by something harder and more enduring, self-reliance. 5 days after the eviction notice, we had our first real conversation about the future. I found him in the kitchen, staring into the refrigerator with unfocused eyes. We need to talk about what happens next, I said. He closed the refrigerator door. What do you want me to say? You've made all the decisions already. I've made one decision, that I deserve basic dignity in my marriage. Everything else depends on you. On me. He laughed bitterly. How is any of this my choice? You're forcing me to choose between my wife and my mother. No, I countered. I'm asking you to choose between being my husband or her echo. There's a difference. He leaned against the counter, suddenly looking exhausted. I love you both, he said. That's not love, I replied. That's cowardice. Love requires courage. The courage to stand up for someone, to prioritize their well-being, to protect them when they're being harmed. She's my mother, he said, as if that explained everything. And I'm your wife. The woman you promised to cherish and protect. Did those vows mean anything to you? He had no answer. Meanwhile, Joanna had adopted a new strategy. Rather than packing efficiently to meet the 30-day deadline, she dragged the process out deliberately, opening a few drawers each day, sighing loudly, occasionally dropping items or slamming doors to ensure we noticed her martyrdom. She attempted to engage me several times, alternating between tearful appeals, after all I've sacrificed for this family, and veiled threats. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I responded with polite disinterest, refusing to provide the emotional reaction she sought. With Zach she was more calculated. I would find them huddled in conversation that abruptly ceased when I entered a room. She would call him multiple times during the workday, strategically when she knew we might be having lunch together. She left nostalgic family photos in prominent places. Zach as a child tucked against her side. Zach began trying small gestures of reconciliation toward me. Flowers left on the kitchen counter, breakfast ordered from my favorite cafe, a tentative hand on my shoulder as he passed. But these token efforts only highlighted how little he understood what had been broken between us. He wasn't sorry I was hurt, he was sorry I had changed. Sorry I had stopped accepting mistreatment. Sorry I had found my voice and my power. 2 weeks into the eviction period, I moved my belongings into the master bedroom. Alone. You're not sleeping in here? Zach asked from the doorway, watching me arrange my clothes in the closet Joanna had finally vacated. No, I said simply. Where am I supposed to sleep? Wherever you've been comfortable sleeping for the past year while I was in the guest room. His face flushed. That was different. Yes, I agreed. It was your choice then. It's mine now. The following day I scheduled another appointment with Ms. Riviera. This time Zach accompanied me, though reluctantly. A post-nuptial agreement? He repeated, staring at the documents she placed before us. You want a divorce? I want security, I corrected. Security that the patterns of the past year won't repeat themselves. The agreement was straightforward. The house would remain in Zach's name, but I would have equal right to occupy and modify it as I saw fit. Our finances would remain separate, with a joint account only for household expenses. And there was one additional clause that made Zach's eyes widen. If your mother returns to live in our home without my explicit written consent, I explained, I retain the right to leave the marriage with 50% of all assets, regardless of duration. You can't be serious, he whispered. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He signed the papers the next day. Not enthusiastically, not with understanding, but with the resignation of a man who had begun to realize the consequences of his year-long silence. 3 days before the deadline, Joanna finally completed her packing. She orchestrated her departure for maximum impact, scheduling it when she knew both Zach and I would be home, hiring movers who carried box after box past us as we sat in strained silence in the living room. She left with 4 suitcases, 12 boxes, and a broken ego. As her car pulled from the driveway, I watched Zach's eyes follow it until it disappeared around the corner. His hands twitched at his sides, but he didn't move to stop her, didn't run after her, didn't promise to fix this. That night, in the silent house that suddenly felt both emptier and more spacious, he approached me as I prepared for bed. What happens to us now? He asked, his voice small. I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing both the man I had married and the stranger he had become in his mother's shadow. I don't know, I answered honestly. But I do know this. If I can build peace without you, I will. He nodded slowly, turned and walked to the guest room. The same room he had once sent me to on our wedding night. As the door closed behind him, something flickered across his face. A dawning comprehension, a belated understanding of equivalence. That's when he finally understood what he'd lost. 3 months have passed since Joanna left. 3 months of reclamation, of transformation, of rebuilding both space and self. The morning after Zach retreated to the guest room, I woke early and drove to the hardware store. I returned with paint samples in shades the house had never seen. Warm terracotta for the living room, sage green for the kitchen, a soft blue-gray for the hallways. Colors with depth and life, nothing like the sterile beige Joanna had insisted was timeless and sophisticated. When Zach came down for coffee, he found me taping sample squares to the walls. What are you doing? He asked, bewildered. Redecorating, I replied simply. The house needs color. He stared at the patches of paint, then at me. Shouldn't we discuss this first? No. I continued taping. But you're welcome to help if you'd like. He didn't help with the painting. But he didn't object either. That was progress of a sort. Over the following weeks, I systematically transformed each room. I replaced Joanna's formal drapes with light, airy curtains that actually let sunlight filter through. I took down the ancestral portraits with their judgmental eyes and hung my own selections. Vibrant landscapes, abstract pieces that spoke to me, and yes, our wedding photos displayed prominently in the entryway. I claimed the kitchen completely, filling the pantry with ingredients Joanna had banned as unhealthy or common. I planted an herb garden in the window box. Basil, rosemary, thyme, mint, their fragrance greeting me each morning as I brewed coffee. I played music while I cooked. Sometimes jazz, sometimes indie rock, sometimes pop that Joanna would have dismissed as noise. Most significantly, I made the master bedroom truly mine. New bedding, new arrangement, new energy. I placed a small writing desk near the window, creating a personal workspace flooded with natural light. I hung a large mirror that Joanna had stored in the attic, claiming it was too modern. Every morning I looked into that mirror and saw someone stronger, clearer, more defined than the woman who had once stood in a wedding dress holding a guest room key. Zach watched this metamorphosis with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. He had expected anger, hostility, ultimatums, the emotional outbursts Joanna had always used. Instead, he witnessed steady, purposeful reconstruction. A woman building herself back piece by piece, creating physical space that reflected her reclaimed power. We established an unspoken rhythm of cohabitation. Polite exchanges over breakfast. Occasional shared dinners where conversations stayed light and impersonal. We functioned less as husband and wife and more as cordial roommates navigating shared territory. "Are we going to be like this forever?" he asked one evening as we passed in the hallway. "Like what?" "Like strangers. Living separate lives under the same roof." I considered his question carefully. "That depends on you." "On me. On whether you can become someone I trust again. Someone who stands beside me instead of above or behind me." He nodded slowly. "I'm trying." "I know." And he was in small ways. He had stopped taking Joanna's daily calls, limiting their contact to once a week. He had begun asking my opinion on household decisions rather than making assumptions. He had even started therapy, reluctantly at first but with growing commitment. I let him stay, not out of obligation or fear or habit but as a conscious choice. A provisional arrangement contingent on continued growth. He understood the terms now. The lease was emotional, renewable only through sustained respect and effort. Joanna, meanwhile, had established herself in a downtown condo, courtesy of the emergency fund she'd been siphoning from our accounts for years. She maintained appearances in her social circle, crafting a narrative where she had magnanimously chosen to give the young couple space. "Mom tells everyone she left to help us work on our marriage," Zach mentioned after one of their weekly calls. I smiled. "Let her. The truth doesn't need defending." Her passive-aggressive texts arrived like clockwork, thinly veiled criticisms wrapped in concern. Just checking if Zach remembered his allergy medication. "The changing seasons are so dangerous." "Saw the most elegant dining set that would suit your home beautifully. The current one always seemed temporary. Your front garden looks interesting. I know a wonderful landscaper if you need help." I never replied. Each message went read but unanswered, a small reminder that her words no longer warranted response. Eventually the frequency diminished, from daily to weekly to occasional. Her power faded with each ignored attempt at engagement. 6 weeks after Joanna's departure, I received an email from a women's support organization where I'd sought guidance during my own struggle. They were organizing a workshop series on financial independence and legal rights within marriage, and wondered if I might share my experience. I agreed immediately. Now twice monthly I sit with circles of women whose stories echo mine in different keys. Women diminished by controlling in-laws, partners, or family systems. Women taught to make themselves small, to prioritize peace over personhood, to accept invisibility as the cost of belonging. I teach them what I learned through hard experience. How to document systematically, how to research legal options, how to build financial independence while flying under the radar. I show them that power doesn't always require shouting, that strategic patience can be more effective than emotional confrontation. "Your story gives me hope," a participant told me after last week's session. "But I don't think I could do what you did. I'm not strong enough." "Strength isn't something you have or don't have," I told her. "It's something you build one small decision at a time." I see myself in these women, in their hesitation, their fear, their desperate hope for change. I recognize the person I was a year ago, standing in a guest room staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all marriage could be. Yesterday as I watered my herb garden, Zach paused in the kitchen doorway. The house has never felt more like a home, he said quietly. I nodded. Because it finally is one. My story isn't a fairy tale with villains vanquished and a prince who saves the day. It's not about dramatic confrontations or tearful reconciliations. It's a strategy executed with precision and patience. I didn't scream or break things when boundaries were crossed. I didn't engage in emotional warfare or ultimatums. I didn't lower myself to tactics that would justify dismissal. Instead, I researched property law and spousal rights while baking cookies for dinner parties. I waited, documenting patterns while smiling politely at backhanded compliments. I signed my name in the right place at the right time, backed by knowledge that transformed legal technicalities into leverage. The girl they sent to the guest room on her wedding night? She stands in the master bedroom now, holding the deed to her own destiny. She walks through hallways painted in colors of her choosing, brushing past photographs that tell her truth. She owns the keys, the title, and most importantly, the narrative. I didn't raise my voice to be heard. I just rose. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Chelsea handed Joanna the eviction notice and calmly said, "You've just been squatting with a dominant personality." What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. My best friend toasted at our wedding. I hope you treat her better than her exes did. Everyone laughed except me. She'd been texting my husband for weeks. I stayed quiet, played sweet. Then I showed her messages to his mother. The wedding ended with one toast and 2 broken hearts. The crystal champagne glass shattered in my grip the moment Julia finished her toast. Blood mixed with champagne, dripping onto my white dress as the room fell silent. For 3 horrifying seconds, everyone stared, then resumed their chatter pretending nothing happened. Just like they'd been pretending not to notice the growing tension between my maid of honor and my new husband. "Let me help you with that," Julia said, rushing to my side with a napkin, her concerned expression perfectly rehearsed. The same expression she wore when texting Brian at 2 a.m. last Tuesday. "I've got it," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. My wedding day. The pinnacle of dreams I'd sketched in diaries since I was 14, now tainted by 7 words delivered with practiced innocence. "Brian, I hope you treat Michelle better than her exes did." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. Because only I knew what those words truly meant. The banquet hall at the Westlake Country Club sparkled with fairy lights and fresh peonies. 200 guests in their finest attire. My mother beaming with pride, Brian's family nodding approvingly. Everything was perfect. The 3-tiered cake, the string quartet, the sunset timing for our first dance. Everything except the knife twisting in my chest every time Julia looked at Brian. "Are you okay?" Brian whispered, taking my bleeding hand. That was quite a grip. His touch still sent electricity through me even now. Even knowing. "Just wedding jitters," I lied, squeezing his hand back. His eyes. Those honest brown eyes I fell for 3 years ago, searched mine for the truth. But tonight he wouldn't find it. Tonight I was protecting something fragile. The illusion that this was still the happiest day of my life. I first noticed the texts 2 months ago. A notification lit up Brian's phone while he was in the shower. Nothing explicit, just Julia asking his opinion on bridesmaid dresses at midnight. Why not ask me? I thought nothing of it initially. Julia had always been overly involved, especially since I named her maid of honor. But then came more messages. Later at night. More personal. More frequent. "You always know exactly what to say," after he'd apparently talked her through a work crisis. "Michelle doesn't appreciate how lucky she is," when he helped her move furniture. "Sometimes I wish I'd met you first," followed by a laughing emoji, that universal shield of plausible deniability. When I confronted Brian 3 weeks before the wedding, he showed me the messages without hesitation. "She's just being Julia," he said. "You know how dramatic she gets. The wedding planning is stressing everyone out." I nodded, pretending to accept his explanation. But that night I created a folder in my phone labeled Evidence. Not because I planned to use it, but because I needed to know I wasn't crazy. That the growing knot in my stomach whenever they shared an inside joke wasn't paranoia. The wedding proceeded despite my doubts. Too many deposits paid. Too many relatives flying in from across the country. Too much shame in admitting I wasn't sure anymore. Time for the couple's dance, the DJ announced, pulling me back to the present moment. Brian led me to the dance floor as our song began playing, At Last by Etta James. His hand pressed firmly against the small of my back as we swayed. You look troubled, he murmured into my ear. Just overwhelmed, I replied, resting my head against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat. Steady. Uncomplicated. Was I making mountains of molehills? Then I saw her watching us. Julia in her maid of honor dress. A shade of burgundy that we'd chosen together over brunch mimosas last fall. Back when I still trusted her implicitly. Her eyes followed our movement with an intensity that chilled me. Not jealousy exactly, something more possessive. As though she was evaluating a purchase she might make later. After our dance, I excused myself to the ladies' room. I needed space to breathe, to think. As I dabbed cold water on my wrists, the bathroom door swung open. Julia. There's my gorgeous bride, she exclaimed, her words slightly slurred from champagne. That toast went over well, don't you think? I met her eyes in the mirror. What exactly did you mean by it? She laughed, touching up her lipstick. Oh, just that Brian's a catch compared to those losers you dated before. Like Ryan? The one you tried to hook up with at my birthday party? Her hand froze mid-application. For a split second her mask slipped. Ancient history, she recovered quickly. Besides, nothing happened. Not for lack of trying, I thought. Back at the reception, I watched Julia bounce between guests, playing the devoted best friend role. She'd known me since freshman orientation, knew about my parents' difficult divorce, my anxiety struggles, every insecurity I'd ever voiced. And now she was weaponizing that intimacy, inserting herself between me and Brian with surgical precision. The evening progressed with cake cutting, bouquet tossing, all the traditional moments that should have felt magical. Instead, I felt like an actress in someone else's production. Every time I glanced at my phone, I saw the folder labeled, Evidence. Every time I looked at Brian, I wondered if he was truly oblivious or simply an excellent liar. When Julia approached us for a photo, her arms snaked around Brian's waist. To the happy couple, she said, her fingers lingering on his jacket. And to many years of keeping promises. That's when I decided. This wasn't about confrontation or dramatic scenes. This required strategy. Patience. The kind of calculated response that would reveal the truth without making me the villain. As we prepared to leave for the night, Julia hugged me tightly. I'm so happy for you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion that almost seemed genuine. I hugged her back just as sincerely. I know exactly what you're doing, I whispered. And I want you to know, I'm letting you dig your own grave. She pulled back, her smile faltering for just a moment before she recovered. You've had too much champagne, she laughed nervously. I smiled serenely. Maybe. Or maybe I've finally sobered up. I squeezed her hands gently. Sleep well tonight, Jules. As Brian and I drove away amid cheers and tossed flower petals, he asked what Julia and I had been whispering about. Just girl talk, I replied, my head already filling with plans. Nothing important. The wedding was over. But the game was just beginning. The morning after our wedding, while Brian snored softly beside me, I scrolled through old photos of Julia and me. 8 years of friendship captured in digital memory. Snow angels outside our freshman dorm. Graduation caps tossed high. Her arm around my shoulders at my father's wake. Her eyes red-rimmed but steady while I fell apart. I paused on one image from sophomore year. Both of us in ridiculous 80s costumes for a themed party. Julia's smile wide and genuine as she looked at me, not the camera. That was the Julia I loved. The one who once drove 6 hours when Ryan cheated on me, arriving at 3 a.m. with ice cream and whiskey. Men are temporary, she'd said, but we're forever. When did forever start expiring? I traced our friendship timeline backward, searching for the first fracture. It wasn't when she met Brian at my birthday dinner 3 years ago. She'd actually seemed indifferent then, making polite conversation while chatting more animatedly with my other friends. Brian even mentioned afterward, I don't think your best friend likes me much. The shift began 6 months into our relationship, after Brian moved in with me. Julia started showing up unannounced, something she'd never done before. I was in the neighborhood, she'd say, though her apartment was across town. She'd bring wine or takeout, insisting Brian join us for roomy bonding. Initially I was thrilled. My boyfriend and best friend getting along seemed like winning the relationship lottery. But then came the subtle changes. Julia started dressing differently when she knew Brian would be around, trading her usual jeans and vintage tees for sundresses and carefully applied makeup. She'd reference inside jokes from our college days, painting herself as the wild one, the desirable one, while casting me as the sensible friend who needed rescuing from her own cautiousness. "Remember that night in Cancun when I had to practically drag Michelle to talk to that cute bartender?" she'd say, laughing while looking directly at Brian. She'd still be standing there waiting for permission if it weren't for me. Brian would chuckle, glancing at me with a newfound curiosity, as if seeing me through Julia's carefully constructed lens. The Christmas before Brian proposed, Julia gave him an expensive watch. Just a little something I saw that screamed Brian, while I received a generic scarf. The subtle message wasn't lost on me. She knew him better, understood his taste more deeply. Then came the engagement. I called Julia first, hands still shaking with excitement. "He finally did it?" she asked, her voice hollow before quickly recovering. "I mean, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you." Later that night, at our celebration dinner, she drank too much and said, "I always knew Brian was marriage material from the moment I introduced you to." "But you didn't introduce us," I corrected her gently. "We met at my birthday." Her eyes flashed briefly. "Right, but I encouraged you to date him, remember? When you weren't sure." I hadn't been unsure. And she hadn't encouraged anything. The wedding planning began and Julia appointed herself unofficial co-planner. "As maid of honor, it's practically my job," she insisted, though I'd only just asked her to take the role. She created a three-way group chat, her, Brian, and me, for wedding decisions. But somehow side conversations sprouted between them. Innocent at first, logistics when I was busy with work. Then opinions about flowers and venues when I was supposedly too stressed to think clearly. During my dress fitting, while my mother wiped away tears, Julia studied my reflection critically. "It's nice," she said, her voice flat. "But is it really you?" That evening I discovered she texted Brian, "Saw the dress today. Gorgeous but maybe too princess. Why? You know Michelle's more understated than that." The comment stung because it contained a kernel of truth. The dress was more elaborate than I'd initially imagined. But the choice had been mine. The doubt now creeping in was hers. The bridesmaid's dress selection became another battlefield. Julia pushed for a style that flattered her figure but looked awkward on my cousins. When I chose something universally flattering instead, she went silent for 3 days, then sent a lengthy text about feeling unheard in the process. 2 months before the wedding, my bachelorette weekend arrived. A trip to a lakeside cabin Julia had organized. She'd invited my college friends and cousins, promising relaxation and fun. The first night, after several drinks, she initiated a game of Never Have I Ever. The questions gradually shifted toward the intimate, thinly veiled attempts to expose my romantic history before Brian. Later, she showed everyone embarrassing photos from our college days, carefully curated to feature me at my worst moments and her at her best. "I'm just giving them the real Michelle," she laughed when I quietly objected. "Brian gets the perfect version. Someone has to keep you humble." The night I found the first suspicious text between them, I was using Brian's phone to order takeout while he showered. A notification from Julia popped up. "Thinking about our conversation earlier. You always know exactly what to say." Something in the wording made my stomach twist. Our conversation? When had they had a private conversation? Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention. Julia would mention having caught up with Brian about wedding details, yet these conversations never seemed to happen when I was present. When I checked our three-way chat, I found gaps, references to decisions I didn't remember discussing. One evening, while Brian slept on the couch, exhausted from overtime, his phone lit up. Another message from Julia. "Sweet dreams, almost husband. Can't believe there's only 3 weeks left until the big day. Almost husband." The presumptive possession in those 2 words crystallized everything I'd been feeling. The next morning, I created a separate email account and began forwarding myself screenshots of their exchanges. Not because I planned to use them, at least not yet, but because gaslighting works by making you doubt your own perception. I needed concrete evidence that I wasn't imagining the subtle invasion happening before my eyes. Julia's just excited about the wedding, Brian said when I cautiously raised the subject of her increasing involvement. She wants everything to be perfect for you. But her perfection involved inserting herself between us at every opportunity. And as our wedding day approached, I realized with growing clarity, this wasn't about making me happy. This was about ensuring she remained essential, indispensable, to both of us. The wedding invitations became the final confirmation. When they arrived, Julia texted Brian directly, "Just saw the invitations. Surprised you went with cream instead of white. Thought we'd discussed ivory being the better choice." As if she were the bride. As if this were her dream too. That's when I knew exactly what I needed to do. The bedside lamp cast a soft glow across our honeymoon suite as I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Brian. His breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of exhaustion, one arm still draped across my pillow. For a moment I watched him sleep, this man I'd just vowed to spend my life with, and felt a pang of something between love and uncertainty. I padded silently to the ornate desk by the window, opened my laptop, and logged into the separate email account I'd created weeks ago, truthkeeper22@gmail.com. Melodramatic, perhaps, but it had served its purpose as a vault for the growing collection of evidence. The wedding night should have been different. I should have been curled against him, whispering about our future, not cataloging betrayal. But here I was, sorting through screenshots while still wearing the lingerie I'd carefully selected for this night. I organized the messages chronologically, starting from 3 months ago. The earliest ones seemed innocent enough. "Brian, could you send me the contact for the florist? Michelle's busy with work stuff. Thanks for handling the deposit. You're so much better with numbers than she is." Little digs disguised as compliments. Subtle undermining that Brian never noticed or challenged. Then the tone shifted about 8 weeks before the wedding. "Sometimes I feel like you're the only one who really gets me. Had a rough day. Can we talk later? You always know how to cheer me up. That suit fitting went well. You must look incredible in it. Lucky Michelle." Brian's responses were friendly but not flirtatious. Still, he never redirected her, never mentioned these conversations to me. The secrecy itself was the betrayal. I created a document titled Timeline, and began correlating messages with events. A pattern emerged. Julia's texts intensified whenever Brian and I had argued. Somehow she always knew our weak moments, offering him sympathy, understanding, the emotional comfort that should have come from reconciliation with me. Had he been confiding in her? Or was she simply skilled at sensing distance between us? One exchange made my stomach clench. "Julia, you seem tense at dinner. Everything okay?" "Brian, just wedding stress. Michelle's been on edge about her mom's opinions on everything." "Julia, you can always vent to me. I'm Switzerland." "Brian, thanks. Sometimes I need neutral territory." "Julia, I'm always here for you. You know that." I remembered that dinner clearly. An argument with my mother about seating arrangements that had spilled into the car ride home. I'd been upset, yes, but Brian's characterization of me as on edge felt unfair, reductive. And Julia positioning herself as Switzerland, neutral territory, was anything but neutral. The message that hurt most came 5 weeks before our wedding day. "You always listen better than she does." 6 words that cut to my deepest insecurity. I'd struggled with active listening since childhood. A diagnosis of mild ADHD in college had explained my tendency to interrupt or lose focus during lengthy conversations. I'd worked hard on it, especially with Brian. To see Julia weaponize this particular vulnerability felt calculated. I clicked print and watched as the printer in the corner of the hotel suite quietly produced page after page. 43 in total. I hadn't realized there were so many until I saw the stack. Working methodically through the night, I used different colored highlighters. Yellow for passive-aggressive comments about me, green for personal compliments to Brian, pink for attempts to create private moments or shared secrets. I annotated each with context, adding sticky notes with my observations. After this message, Brian canceled our dinner plans, claiming work emergency. Julia posted Instagram story at same restaurant he ended up at with colleagues. This exchange happened during my bridal shower while Julia claimed bathroom break. By dawn I had a comprehensive dossier. Not the work of a jealous, irrational bride, but a methodical documentation of a pattern. Nothing explicitly romantic or sexual, That would have been easier to confront. This was subtler, more insidious. An emotional intrusion disguised as friendship. I slipped everything into a manila envelope, sealing it with a steady hand. The morning light was beginning to filter through the curtains as I returned to bed, curling against Brian's sleeping form. He stirred slightly, pulling me closer. I closed my eyes but didn't sleep. Later that morning, over room service breakfast, Brian scrolled through wedding photos already appearing on social media. "Julia really outdid herself with the planning," he commented, showing me a perfectly captured first dance shot she'd posted. "We should get her something special as a thank you." I smiled tightly. "Actually, I was thinking about visiting your mom today. She mentioned wanting to have lunch before we leave for the honeymoon." Brian raised an eyebrow. "On our first day as husband and wife? Can't it wait?" "It's important to me," I said softly. "You know how much I adore Lydia. And it's just for an hour or so." He shrugged. "Sure. I've got some emails to catch up on anyway. Maybe I'll hit the hotel gym." As he showered, I texted Lydia, "Would love to see you today. Just us. Something important to discuss. Lunch at your place." Her response came quickly, "Of course, darling. 1 p.m. Everything all right?" I replied with a heart emoji. No need to alarm her yet. I dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual. I didn't want to appear desperate or hysterical. This needed to come across as reasoned concern, not jealous paranoia. The manila envelope fit perfectly into my structured handbag, hidden from Brian's view as I kissed him goodbye. "Give Mom my love," he said, already distracted by his laptop. On the drive to Lydia's suburban home, I rehearsed opening lines in my head, discarding each as too dramatic or too understated. How does one begin such a conversation? "Your son isn't cheating, but..." Lydia had always been perceptive. During our first meeting 3 years ago, after Brian had left the room, she'd studied me thoughtfully before saying, "He looks at you differently than the others. Like you're not just passing through his life." We'd formed a bond then, built on mutual appreciation for her son and a shared dry humor. She'd also been the first to comment on Julia's behavior, noticing what I'd initially missed. At our engagement party, she'd pulled me aside. "That friend of yours, she stands too close to Brian. Watches him too carefully. I've seen that look before." I dismissed her concern then. Now I was counting on that same instinct. As I pulled into her driveway, I took a deep breath and checked my reflection. Eyes clear, expression composed. No smeared mascara or trembling lip to betray the turmoil beneath. Lydia opened the door before I could knock, enfolding me in a warm embrace that smelled of garden roses and expensive perfume. "My beautiful daughter-in-law," she murmured. "Come in. I've made lunch." I followed her inside, the envelope heavy against my side. Not a bomb to destroy but a shield to protect. Not an end but a beginning. The truth couldn't wait any longer. Lydia's colonial-style home always felt like stepping into a different era. Tasteful antiques, fresh flowers in crystal vases, and photographs spanning generations displayed in silver frames. Today, those same elements felt like silent witnesses to what I was about to reveal. "I made cucumber sandwiches," she said, leading me to the sunroom where a small table was set with her grandmother's china. "And that lemon tea you like." The domesticity of the scene made what I carried feel even more intrusive. I placed my bag beside my chair but didn't immediately reach for the envelope. "Brian told me you're leaving for Belize tomorrow," Lydia said, pouring tea into delicate cups. "The honeymoon suite at that eco-resort looks stunning in the photos." "It does," I agreed, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Lydia set down the teapot, her keen eyes studying me. The elegant lines of her face, so similar to Brian's, creased with concern. At 62, she carried herself with the same quiet confidence I'd always admired in her son. "You look tired," she said, reaching across to touch my hand. "Wedding stress." I met her gaze directly. "Not exactly." The words hung between us. Lydia waited, giving me space to continue at my own pace, a trait Brian had inherited from her. "Lydia, I need to show you something," I finally said, reaching for my bag. "And I need you to know that I've thought very carefully about bringing this to you." I removed the manila envelope and placed it on the table between us, my hand resting protectively over it for a moment. "I'm sorry to bring this here," I continued, "but I didn't know who else to show." Curiosity flickered across her face as she accepted the envelope, weighing it in her hands as if gauging its importance by its heft. "This is about Brian?" she asked, not yet opening it. "Yes." "And Julia?" Understanding immediately dawned in her eyes. "Ah," she said softly. "That one." She opened the envelope slowly, methodically removing the contents and arranging them before her like playing cards. The first few pages drew minimal reaction. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a thoughtful pursing of the lips. But as she continued reading, flipping through pages more rapidly, her expression changed. The polite social mask she wore so elegantly slipped, revealing a mother's fierce protectiveness underneath. Her face fell into a long, silent frown as she studied a particularly highlighted exchange. "When did all this start?" she asked quietly. "Months ago," I said, the words catching slightly in my throat. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it. Lydia continued reading, occasionally pausing to reread certain messages. I sipped my tea, watching her absorb the evidence I'd compiled so carefully. The cucumber sandwiches remained untouched between us. "She certainly has a talent for inserting herself," Lydia murmured, more to herself than to me. "Always the supporting character, making herself the lead." I nodded, relieved that she saw what I saw. "Brian doesn't see it," I said. "Or doesn't want to." "Men rarely do," she replied, her tone carrying the weight of personal experience. "Especially when flattery is involved." She returned to the documents, examining my timeline with particular interest. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the occasional turning of pages. When she finally looked up, her expression had shifted from concern to resolve. "You did the right thing coming here," she said firmly. The validation released something tight in my chest. I hadn't realized how desperately I'd needed someone else to confirm what I'd seen, that I wasn't manufacturing problems or overreacting from wedding nerves. Lydia gathered the papers, tapping them against the table to align them perfectly before returning them to the envelope. Her movements were precise, controlled. A woman accustomed to managing difficult situations with grace. "I've watched Julia for years," she said. "At family gatherings, holidays, dinners. Always hovering near Brian, always finding reasons to touch his arm or whisper in his ear." She shook her head. "I thought perhaps I was being an overprotective mother." "I dismissed your concerns too," I admitted. "I trusted her completely." "Trust is your gift," Lydia said. "But sometimes it's also your vulnerability." She rose, moving to a writing desk in the corner of the room. From a drawer she removed a leather-bound address book, turning pages with purpose. "This isn't cheating," she said, finding the page she sought. "But it's close. Too close." "That's what scares me," I replied, feeling the emotion rise in my throat. "It's emotional. And it was never mine to consent to." She nodded, returning to the table with the address book. "Precisely. It's a violation of boundaries that's difficult to name but impossible to ignore." She wrote something on a notepad, a phone number, then tore off the page and tucked it into the envelope. "I've known Julia's mother since our garden club days," she explained. "Caroline has always been mortified by her daughter's intensity with other women's partners. There was an incident years ago with Caroline's bridge partner's husband." She sealed the envelope decisively. "History repeats itself, apparently." I hadn't known this about Julia. The revelation added new context to behaviors I'd normalized for years. "What will you do?" I asked. "Let me handle the rest," Lydia said, her tone brooking no argument. "This requires a certain approach." I didn't ask how. I trusted her. She took my hands in hers, her fingers cool and dry against my skin. "Brian has his father's blind spots," she said softly. "He sees the best in people to a fault. It made Jack vulnerable to those who took advantage of his generosity. I won't let history repeat itself with my son." The mention of Brian's father, dead 5 years now from heart failure, carried significant weight. Lydia rarely spoke of her late husband's weaknesses, preferring to preserve his memory unmarred. "Should I talk to Brian?" I asked. She considered this, then shook her head. "Not yet. Men often become defensive when confronted with their own naivety. Let's approach this differently." She squeezed my hands once more before releasing them. "Go back to the hotel. Act normally. Let him believe your visit with me was nothing more than a newlywed checking in with her mother-in-law. I nodded, standing to leave. A mixture of emotions swirled within me. Guilt for what felt like going behind Brian's back, relief at having shared my burden, apprehension about what would come next. Lydia walked me to the door, enveloping me in a warm embrace. "You're stronger than you realize," she whispered. "And you've married into a family that protects its own." As I walked to my car, I felt both lighter and heavier simultaneously. I hadn't screamed in frustration. I hadn't confronted Julia in a dramatic showdown. I hadn't accused Brian of betrayal. I had simply shown the truth and let it do the talking. What happened next would unfold according to its own natural consequences. I had planted the seed. Now I would watch it grow. The 5 days between my visit to Lydia and her casual family brunch passed in a strange limbo. Brian and I returned to our apartment, unpacked wedding gifts, and wrote thank you notes like any normal newlywed couple. We made love, discussed honeymoon plans, and fell asleep in each other's arms, all while I carried the weight of what was coming. Lydia called daily with innocent-sounding updates about the brunch menu or questions about dietary restrictions. But beneath these mundane conversations ran an undercurrent of shared purpose. "Julia confirmed she's coming," she mentioned casually during our Thursday call. "Said she wouldn't miss it for the world." "Of course she wouldn't," I replied, catching Brian's questioning glance from across the room. "Everything okay?" he asked after I hung up. "Just your mom being thorough about Sunday," I said, smiling as I returned to addressing envelopes. Saturday night, I lay awake beside Brian, rehearsing potential scenarios in my mind. Would Julia deny everything? Would Brian defend her? Would I emerge as the villain, the jealous, paranoid wife? The thought made my stomach clench. I'd seen enough reality TV to know how quickly a woman could be labeled crazy for pointing out uncomfortable truths. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Brian hummed in the shower, oblivious to what awaited him. I dressed with particular care. A pale blue sundress that Brian had once said made me look radiant but not trying too hard. My armor for the day ahead. "You're quiet," Brian noted as we drove to his mother's house. "Just tired," I said. Still catching up from the wedding whirlwind. We arrived 30 minutes early at Lydia's request. She met us at the door in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, pearls at her throat, dressed for battle in her own subtle way. "Brian, darling, would you mind bringing up the extra folding chairs from the basement?" she asked, smoothly separating us. The Miller cousins decided to join last minute. The moment he disappeared downstairs, Lydia pulled me into the kitchen. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I nodded, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "Remember," she said, squeezing my hand, "this isn't about punishing anyone. It's about clearing the air so you can truly begin your marriage without this interference." Other family members began arriving. Brian's sister with her husband and children, his uncle Robert, a few cousins. Small talk flowed around me as I helped arrange platters of quiche and fruit. My hands moved automatically while my mind remained fixed on the envelope I'd spotted in Lydia's study, positioned conspicuously on her desk. Julia arrived 45 minutes late. She swept in wearing a fitted red dress that seemed excessive for a family brunch, her makeup flawless, her laugh audible from the entryway. "Sorry I'm late," she called out, air-kissing relatives as she made her way through the living room. "Traffic was a nightmare." She embraced Brian warmly, too warmly, before turning to me with a performance of affection. "Mrs. Miller, how's married life treating you?" Before I could answer, Lydia appeared at my side, champagne flute in hand. The room quieted instinctively. Lydia had that effect on people. "Julia," she said, her tone polite but lacking its usual warmth. "You're just in time. We're doing toasts again." Julia blinked, momentarily thrown off script. "Toasts?" "Yes," Lydia continued, raising her glass slightly. "To clarity, honesty, and the people who know when to step away." A confused murmur rippled through the gathered family members. Brian glanced between his mother and Julia, sensing something amiss but unable to identify it. Julia laughed nervously, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's specific." "Indeed it is," Lydia replied, setting down her glass. She disappeared briefly into her study, returning with the manila envelope. "You left something behind, Julia." She extended the envelope with elegant precision. Julia took it automatically, her confidence visibly wavering. "What's this?" she asked, her voice higher than usual. "Something you should see," Lydia answered simply. The color drained from Julia's face as she read the label I'd written. Communications between Julia Harris and Brian Miller, January-May 2025. Brian stepped forward, confusion etched across his features. He turned to me. "What's going on?" I met his gaze steadily. "Ask her," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Julia opened the folder with trembling fingers. The room had fallen completely silent, even the children sensing the sudden tension. Her eyes darted across the first page, then widened in recognition. "This isn't what it looks like," she muttered, looking up with panic flashing across her face. "Then why did it feel that way for so long?" I replied quietly. Brian crossed the room, his expression a mixture of concern and growing suspicion. He took the envelope from Julia's unresisting hands, his eyes scanning the highlighted messages. His face darkened as he flipped through page after page of evidence. "When did you?" he began, looking at me, then stopped. "Why would you?" he turned to Julia, unable to complete either question. Julia's composure cracked entirely. "It was just friendly conversation," she insisted, her voice rising. "Michelle is completely overreacting. We were planning her dream wedding." "By telling my husband I don't listen properly?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "By texting him at midnight about how he deserves better?" Brian continued reading, his body language growing more rigid with each page. When he reached the message about being too good for just one girl, he closed the folder abruptly. "I think you should go," he said to Julia, not meeting her eyes. "Brian, this is ridiculous," she pleaded, reaching for his arm. "She's twisting everything. You know me better than that." "Do I?" he asked, finally looking at her directly. "Because I'm not sure I recognize the person who wrote these messages." Tears sprang to Julia's eyes. Whether genuine or tactical, I couldn't tell. "Michelle has always been insecure," she said, glancing around the room for support. "She's turning innocent friendship into something ugly because she's afraid of losing you." I remained silent, letting the evidence speak for itself. The family watched, uncomfortably captivated by the unfolding drama. Brian looked at the folder in his hands, then at me, a question in his eyes. "I found out weeks ago," I said softly. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Understanding dawned on his face, remembering my quiet withdrawal before the wedding, the moments he'd caught me staring at my phone with troubled eyes. Julia made one final attempt. "This is absurd," she said, laughing shakily. "We're all adults here. Michelle, if you felt threatened, you should have talked to me directly instead of creating this dossier. It's creepy, honestly." "What's creepy?" Lydia interjected coolly. "Is pursuing a relationship with your best friend's husband under the guise of friendship." She turned to the rest of the family. "I think we've all seen enough. Julia, your mother sends her regards. She mentioned something about discussing boundaries when you get home." The reference to her mother visibly deflated Julia. She looked around the room, searching for allies and finding none. Brian had moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. "Fine," she said, gathering her purse. "Enjoy your little family brunch. Sorry I ruined the perfect facade." As she turned to leave, Lydia raised her champagne glass once more. "A final toast," she announced, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent room. "To broken illusions, and the strength to walk away from them." The family hesitantly raised their glasses, confusion still evident on many faces. Brian's hand tightened around mine as Julia's heels clicked angrily down the hallway toward the front door. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house, a period at the end of an 8-year sentence. The brunch disintegrated after Julia's departure. Family members made awkward excuses and filtered out, leaving behind half-eaten quiches and uncomfortable glances. Brian's cousins whispered among themselves, casting curious looks our way. His sister embraced me tightly before leaving, whispering, "Call me if you need anything." The unspoken gravity in her voice told me she understood more than most. Lydia busied herself clearing plates, giving Brian and me space. We sat in her garden, a carefully cultivated sanctuary of roses and hydrangeas, neither of us ready to break the silence that had fallen between us. "We should go," Brian finally said, his voice hollow. I nodded, thanked Lydia mechanically, and followed him to the car. The 20-minute drive home stretched for an eternity. Brian gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched white. Twice he started to speak, then stopped. I stared out the window, watching suburban landscapes blur past, feeling simultaneously victorious and devastated. At home, Brian placed Julia's house key on our entry table. She'd had it since we moved in, for emergencies, she'd insisted. The small brass key made a definitive sound against the wooden surface, like a period at the end of a sentence. I should have seen it, he said finally. Not an apology, not quite, but an acknowledgement. I said nothing, moving to the kitchen to make tea we wouldn't drink. That night, as we lay in bed with a careful distance between us, Brian asked if I wanted to talk. The question hung in the darkness between us. I don't, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I need space. He nodded, respecting the boundary. Our honeymoon tickets. He began. Cancel them, I said. We're not ready. The airline refunded half the cost of our Belize getaway. I used my portion to buy a sleeper sofa for our home office, moving my clothes and essential items there the following day while Brian was at work. Not a permanent relocation, just a necessary distance while we recalibrated. We established an odd routine over the following days. Polite greetings in the morning. Separate meals. Careful coordination of bathroom schedules. We didn't fight. We didn't cry. We didn't slam doors or throw accusations. We just let the silence stretch between us, becoming its own language. 3 days after the brunch, Julia texted, I never meant to come between you two. 7 words carefully crafted to absolve herself while implying I was overreacting. No apology. No acknowledgement of boundaries crossed or trust violated. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. A week into our strange new reality, I came home to find Brian preparing dinner. My favorite pasta dish. A peace offering, not pushing for reconciliation but acknowledging we still occupied the same space, the same life. Thank you, I said, accepting a plate but taking it to the office rather than joining him at the table. Not punishment but self-protection. I wasn't ready to slip back into normalcy without addressing what had happened. Lydia called every few days, checking in with measured concern. He's giving you space, she reported. That's good. He needs to sit with this. I'm not trying to punish him, I explained, feeling a need to clarify my position. I just can't pretend it didn't happen. Of course not, she agreed. Trust takes time to rebuild. Sometimes it needs to be dismantled completely before you can construct something stronger. On day 10, Brian left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. I miss you. Not just physically. I miss the safety we had. I'm sorry I compromised that. I read it 3 times, tracing his familiar handwriting with my fingertip. The acknowledgement loosened something in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. That evening, he knocked on the office door. I invited him in, watching as he took in the space I'd created. My books stacked neatly on the desk, my clothes hanging in the closet, my presence firmly established. I found a therapist, he said, sitting on the edge of the sofa bed. Someone who specializes in couples work. Would you consider going? Not because I'm trying to rush things, but because I think we need help navigating this. I studied his face, the familiar lines around his eyes, the sincerity in his expression, the vulnerability he rarely showed. Yes, I agreed, not for him but for myself. I needed to hear myself say out loud what I'd been swallowing for months. I needed a neutral space to articulate the slow erosion of security I'd felt. Our first session was uncomfortable, stilted admissions and careful phrasing. The therapist, Dr. Levine, observed our dance of politeness with knowing eyes. Michelle, she said toward the end of the hour, what do you need from Brian that you're not getting? The question broke something open in me. Recognition, I said, finally meeting Brian's eyes directly. Recognition that what happened wasn't just friendship gone awry. It was a systematic attempt by someone I trusted to create intimacy with my partner behind my back. And recognition that you participated in it, even if passively. Brian flinched but didn't look away. I didn't see it, he admitted. Or maybe I didn't want to. The attention felt good and I told myself it was harmless because there was nothing physical. Trust isn't always shattered in affairs, I replied, the words emerging fully formed from some deeper understanding. Sometimes it dies by degrees, through omissions, secrets, and laughter that excludes. Dr. Levine nodded, letting the weight of the statement settle between us. We continued therapy weekly, gradually moving from separate bedrooms to sharing our space again. Not with the naive trust of before, but with something more conscious, more earned. Julia vanished from our lives completely. She moved across town, then eventually to Chicago for a job opportunity. Information that reached us through mutual friends who gradually stopped mentioning her name around us. I never deleted the email account where I'd stored the evidence. I didn't need to revisit it, but its existence served as a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that I had trusted my instincts when they mattered most. 6 months after our wedding, Brian and I finally took our honeymoon, not to Belize as originally planned, but to a coastal cottage in Maine. Simple, private, reflective. We walked beaches collecting sea glass, each piece smoothed by time and friction into something new. I underestimated you, Brian said one evening as we watched waves crash against rocky shores. I always saw your kindness as softness. It isn't. It's a different kind of strength. I nodded, accepting the observation. I've learned that betrayal doesn't always wear red lipstick or come with hotel keys. Sometimes, it raises a toast at your wedding and hopes you never read between the lines. But you did, he said quietly. And I rose, I finished, taking his hand in mine. Not the fairy tale beginning I'd imagined, but perhaps something more valuable. A marriage tested early and found resilient. A partnership with clear eyes rather than rose-colored glasses. A love chosen daily rather than assumed eternally. We were building a new foundation. One created with awareness of our weaknesses and respect for our boundaries. One built on things that don't require proof because they're demonstrated consistently through actions, not words. One text message at a time. One therapy session at a time. One truth at a time. Sometimes broken things, when mended with care, become stronger at the fracture points. Sometimes what rises from ashes isn't the same shape as what burned, but it's more fireproof. And sometimes, the loudest statement is the one never spoken. The unanswered text, the friendship ended without dramatic declaration, the quiet dignity of walking away. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Lydia hosted that family brunch and handed Julia the manila envelope with all the evidence, saying, "You left something behind." That cold, calculated moment of exposure was absolutely perfect. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. My fiancé mocked my weight in front of his friends, chuckling, "She's too big to land anyone else. Who'd want her? Besides, she can't run away even if she tried." His friends laughed and I just smiled, saying nothing. 6 months later, I walked into a gala, hand in hand with his siot. His jaw dropped as I turned to him and said, "Oh, hi." It was supposed to be a quiet dinner, just Jason and me, a rare night away from our hectic lives. But instead, I found myself staring at the polished wood of the restaurant table, listening to the unmistakable sound of Jason's laughter echoing from the next booth. His voice was louder than usual, filled with a kind of excitement that made me smile at first, until I realized it wasn't excitement directed toward me. "I mean, look at her," Jason's voice boomed. "She's way too big to land anyone else, don't you think? Who would want her? Besides, she can't even run away if she tried." I froze. My fork hovered in midair and my stomach twisted as the words sank in. His friends joined in, their laughter bubbling over in a way that made my skin crawl. The sound felt like needles pricking at my skin, each chuckle a sharp jab. I could feel the heat rise in my face, my heart beating louder in my chest, threatening to burst from the sheer embarrassment. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I forced myself to smile, a fragile mask of composure. I pretended not to hear, even though every word hit me like a physical blow. There I was, sitting across from the man who was supposed to love me, the man who had promised to protect me, laughing at my expense. The realization that Jason was capable of such cruelty gnawed at me. How long had he felt this way? Was this what he truly thought of me all along? I didn't know how long I sat there before I finally managed to push the food around on my plate, pretending to be just as engaged in the conversation as they were. But inside, a storm was raging. I had always known that Jason wasn't the most considerate guy. He had his flaws, sure, but I had never imagined he could be this ruthless, this heartless. I had convinced myself that, despite everything, he loved me. That this was just another joke, harmless and thoughtless. But now as I sat there, the truth became undeniable. He didn't love me. If he did, he wouldn't have treated me this way. And worse, he wasn't even aware of the weight of his words. To him it was all just a laugh, a bit of fun to share with his friends. But to me, it felt like my soul was being chipped away piece by piece. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. His laughter, once a comforting sound, now felt like a betrayal, like a lie I had been too naive to see. I wasn't just his girlfriend anymore. I was a joke. I was nothing but the punchline to his cruel humor. My heart pounded in my chest and I felt tears pricking at the back of my eyes. But I swallowed them down. Not here, not in front of his friends. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I wouldn't show him how much his words hurt me. But the truth was, as much as I wanted to stay composed, I felt shattered. And for the first time I saw our relationship for what it truly was. A one-sided illusion. I had been clinging to the belief that I was enough for him, that I could make this work, that love would somehow bridge the gaps. But now, sitting at this table, I realized how foolish that had been. The laughter continued around me, but I was no longer part of it. I was a silent observer, trapped in a moment where my world was falling apart. The faces around me, Jason's friends, all smiled and joked, oblivious to the fact that their words had cut through me like a knife. Finally, Jason turned to me, his grin still wide, not even noticing the discomfort in my eyes. "What do you think, babe?" he asked, clearly expecting me to laugh along with him. For a moment I just stared at him, wondering how I had ever allowed myself to believe that this was love. Was this how he saw me? Was this how everyone saw me? I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell him how disgusted I was, how much his words had hurt. But I didn't. I simply forced a smile, nodding as if I hadn't heard a thing. I couldn't show weakness. Not now. But in that moment something inside me broke and I knew I could never go back to being that woman. The woman who stayed silent, who pretended everything was okay while the world around her crumbled. The meal dragged on after that, but I was no longer present. My mind raced, planning the future, and all the while Jason and his friends carried on, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. Every laugh, every comment, every glance made me feel smaller and smaller. But as much as I wanted to run, to escape from this humiliating situation, I stayed. I stayed because, deep down, I knew that something needed to change. That night, when we finally left the restaurant, Jason walked ahead, chatting with his friends, unaware of the emotional turmoil swirling inside me. I followed him, my steps slow, heavy with the weight of the realization that this was the end of something. Of him, of me, of us. As we reached the car, I stopped in my tracks. Jason looked back, an impatient frown forming as he turned to me. "What now?" he asked, a sharp edge in his voice. "Come on, let's get going." I took a deep breath, my chest tightening. My mind raced with the words I had been holding back, the words I had been too afraid to say until now. But as I stood there, I knew it was time. "I'm done, Jason," I said quietly, but my voice didn't tremble. It was steady, firm, final. This isn't working for me anymore. "I'm done with you." He blinked, confused. "What do you mean, done? We were just having fun." But it wasn't fun. It never had been. I shook my head, the last of my patience with him slipping away. I'm done with the jokes, done with the insults, and done with pretending everything's fine when it's not. I deserve better than this. Jason opened his mouth, but no words came out. He stood there looking at me, completely stunned. For a second, he seemed to realize the weight of what I was saying, but he quickly covered it with his usual arrogance. "You're overreacting. Come on, let's go home." But I didn't move. I was done. Turning on my heels, I walked away from him, every step feeling like a declaration of independence. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone who couldn't respect me. The moment I walked away from Jason, I knew that something inside me had changed. I had been through enough. I didn't need to stay in a relationship where I wasn't valued. This was the breaking point. And with that decision, everything in my life was about to change. As I walked away from Jason that night, my heart was a chaotic mix of emotions. There was a sense of relief, a strange lightness that came with the finality of my decision. But there was also fear. What now? What was next for me? For so long, I had defined myself through my relationship with him, through the promises and the affection he had supposedly given me. But now, in the cold quiet of that moment, I realized how much of myself I had lost along the way. I had allowed his words, his judgments, to shape my view of myself. and now I had to rebuild. The days that followed were a blur, a whirlwind of emotions that I could barely keep up with. The shock of walking away from everything I knew still lingered, but underneath it, a quiet resolve was beginning to take root. I wasn't sure how I would do it, but I knew one thing. I needed to change. I needed to prove to myself that I could be better than the version of me that Jason had seen. The version that let him degrade her without saying a word. The version that had stayed silent, afraid to step into the light of her own strength. So I started small. The first thing I did was book an appointment with a personal trainer. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but I knew I wanted to feel strong inside and out. When I walked into the gym that first day, I felt like a fish out of water. It had been years since I'd really taken care of my body, and I didn't know where to start. The machines all seemed intimidating, and the loud thumping of music only made me feel more out of place. But I couldn't let that stop me. I was tired of hiding from myself. I was tired of letting fear dictate my choices. I met with Rachel, my trainer, the following morning. She was the kind of woman who seemed to radiate confidence without even trying. Her toned arms, her posture, the way she walked. Everything about her was a reflection of strength inside and out. I felt both inspired and intimidated by her, but I was determined to keep going. She gave me a plan, a routine that was tailored to where I was starting from. Someone who had been neglecting her physical health for far too long. At first it was hard. Really hard. My muscles ached in ways I had never experienced before, and there were mornings when I didn't want to get out of bed. But Rachel always encouraged me to keep going. She reminded me that this wasn't just about losing weight or fitting into a certain mold. It was about gaining strength, gaining confidence. I began to realize that with every drop of sweat, every aching muscle, I was rebuilding something that had been broken inside me for years. My belief in myself. It wasn't just my body that changed, though. As I began to see physical results, I started to feel stronger mentally too. The constant self-doubt, the fear of what others thought of me, the fear of being inadequate, all of it began to melt away. It was like a fog lifting, and I could finally see things clearly. I was no longer the person who let others control her narrative. I was no longer the person who allowed herself to be the butt of jokes. I was Claire Thompson, and I was reclaiming my life. As the weeks passed, I began to push myself harder. The gym became my sanctuary, my place of strength and healing. But there was more to my transformation than just the physical aspect. I knew that true change had to come from within. I needed to confront the emotional baggage I had been carrying with me all these years. I started therapy, seeking help to unpack the layers of hurt, insecurity, and fear that I had buried deep inside. It was in therapy that I began to understand just how much I had allowed Jason to define me. For years, I had been so focused on making him happy, on trying to fit into the mold he had created for me, that I had lost sight of who I really was. I had put his needs before mine, his dreams before my own, all in the name of love. But it wasn't love. Not the kind of love I deserved. I began to realize that I had been waiting for someone else to validate me, to tell me I was worth something. Jason's cruel words were a reflection of his own insecurities, not mine. But I had internalized them, carried them with me, and let them chip away at my sense of self. No more. I wasn't going to let someone else's cruelty dictate how I saw myself anymore. With each session, I unraveled more of the layers that had held me back. I confronted my past mistakes, my fears, and the negative patterns I had allowed myself to fall into. It was painful at times, and there were moments when I wanted to give up. But I kept going, knowing that on the other side of that pain was freedom. Freedom from the expectations of others. Freedom from the fear of judgment. And, most importantly, freedom from the toxic relationship that had held me captive for far too long. At work, I started to excel as well. I threw myself into my career, focusing on the things that mattered to me. I worked harder, stayed late, and went above and beyond to prove my worth. Not to anyone else, but to myself. I began to rise through the ranks, gaining recognition from my colleagues and superiors. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something for me. Not for Jason. Not for anyone else. But for me. One day, as I was working on a particularly challenging project, I was called into a meeting with Daniel Whitmore, the CEO of the company. I had never really interacted with him much before, but I had heard whispers about his impressive leadership and his reputation as a man who valued hard work. As I walked into his office, I couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and excitement. Here was a man who had built his own empire, someone who commanded respect and attention. The meeting went well. Better than I had anticipated. Daniel praised my work, my dedication, and my drive. There was something about the way he spoke to me that made me feel seen, valued, and respected. It wasn't the empty flattery I had grown accustomed to from Jason. It was genuine admiration. For the first time in ages, I felt like my efforts were being recognized, not because I was a woman or because I was trying to please someone, but because I had earned it. As the meeting ended, Daniel offered me a new project, one that would require me to take on more responsibility. He said that he saw potential in me, something I hadn't fully seen in myself before. But in that moment something clicked. I was no longer the woman who relied on the validation of others. I was Claire Thompson, and I was capable of anything. With every step I took toward my personal and professional transformation, I was building a version of myself that was unrecognizable to the one who had walked away from Jason just weeks earlier. I wasn't just changing my body, I was reshaping my entire life. And with each passing day I grew stronger, more confident, and more certain of my worth. But the most important change was the one that was happening deep inside me. I was learning to love myself. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone else to tell me that I was enough. I knew it for myself. It had been a few weeks since that pivotal meeting with Daniel Whitmore. I'd pushed myself further than I ever thought possible, embracing the challenges at work, and I couldn't deny that the transformation in my career was beginning to match the one I was creating within myself. I was becoming someone who didn't need external validation to feel worthy, but every time Daniel praised me for my hard work, I couldn't help but feel a warm sense of pride swell inside me. His admiration wasn't like the hollow compliments I had grown used to from Jason. With Daniel it was different. There was a depth to his recognition, a genuine appreciation for my efforts that resonated deeply. I could tell he was a man who saw potential in people, who recognized the spark in someone's heart and nurtured it. And with each interaction, that spark inside me began to grow. It wasn't just his words that struck me, it was his presence. Daniel wasn't someone who needed to assert his authority with loud gestures or boastful claims. There was a quiet confidence in him, a calm strength that commanded respect. And yet, despite the high-ranking position he held, there was no arrogance. It was as if he treated everyone regardless of their status with a sense of fairness. I found myself drawn to that. I found myself wanting to be around him more, to impress him. Not because I needed his approval, but because I respected him and wanted him to see what I was truly capable of. The day we first had lunch together outside of work seemed like any other ordinary meeting, but looking back I knew it marked the beginning of something new, something that would change everything. We had both been working tirelessly on a new project, and when he asked if I'd join him for a quick bite to discuss the finer details, I agreed without hesitation. At the time I wasn't thinking about anything beyond work. I hadn't even realized how much of an effect his company had had on my emotional transformation until we sat down across from each other at a small cafe near the office. There was a quiet hum in the air as we talked shop at first, dissecting strategies and debating the best approaches. But as the conversation naturally shifted to personal matters, I found myself opening up in a way that surprised me. We spoke about the pressures of leadership, the sacrifices we make for success, and the things we'd both learned along the way. And somewhere between sharing stories of late nights at the office and reflecting on past failures, I realized just how comfortable I felt in his presence. His gaze was steady, thoughtful, never judgmental, and for the first time in a long while I found myself feeling truly seen. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about connection. About finding someone who not only understood the depths of my ambition but also the complexities of my emotions. I felt like I could be real with him in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be with anyone for years. But that was the paradox, wasn't it? I wasn't looking for a relationship. Not at all. Yet every time we spoke, every time our paths crossed, something inside me started to shift. For weeks after that lunch, we continued to work closely together on the project, and the admiration I had for Daniel only deepened. There was a certain calm to him, a grounded energy that grounded me in return. I wasn't used to that kind of stability. It had been so long since I'd trusted anyone so completely. Jason had never been that person. Jason had been the kind of man who created chaos in his wake, who lived for the moment and often dragged me down with him. Daniel was different. He was the kind of man who created possibilities. One late afternoon, as we wrapped up another meeting in his office, Daniel lingered for a moment longer than usual, watching me as I gathered my things. "You've come a long way since we first met, Claire," he said, his voice calm but steady, his eyes locking with mine in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. I admire your work ethic. You've got something rare. I can see it even if you don't always recognize it yourself. My breath caught in my throat. There it was again. His ability to make me feel as though I was worthy of more than I thought I was. It was strange how his words held weight, how they seemed to touch places within me that had been closed off for so long. Thank you, I managed, my voice quieter than usual, a little taken aback by the sincerity in his tone. I've just been trying to prove to myself that I can do this. And you are, he replied, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. But you don't have to do it all alone. I didn't know how to respond to that. It wasn't an offer of help. It was more of an acknowledgement of the journey I was on, and a subtle invitation to open up more, to let him in. But I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't looking for someone to lean on, not yet. Not in the way he might have been implying. Still, his words lingered with me like a gentle touch on my heart. It was strange. I hadn't expected this sense of being cared for, of being seen. It felt almost intimate even though it wasn't. I shook the thought away. I was imagining things, reading too much into a professional exchange. I was overthinking. The following week we found ourselves working late into the night on a tight deadline. The office was quieter than usual, the usual bustle replaced by the soft tapping of keyboards and the distant hum of the air conditioning. The exhaustion was setting in, but as we reviewed our work together, the atmosphere between us shifted. There was a subtle tension in the air, a quiet energy that hadn't been there before. I think we've got it, Daniel said, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that left me breathless for a split second. You've done a hell of a job, Claire. You should be proud of yourself. I nodded, but before I could reply, he added, I don't say this lightly, but I think you're ready for more responsibility. You've proven yourself. His words were like a jolt to my system. This wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about trust, about stepping into a new role that could change everything. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. I wasn't just capable of handling more. I was ready to take it on, to seize this moment and run with it. For me. I won't let you down, I said, my voice steady with resolve. I wasn't just talking about the project. I was talking about the person I had become. Daniel studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, his gaze softening. I know you won't. That's why I'm offering you this opportunity. For the rest of the night we worked in tandem, the hours passing by in a blur. But in that moment something had changed. I wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. I wasn't doing this for anyone's approval. I was doing this for myself. And that realization, that ownership of my journey, felt more empowering than anything I had experienced before. As I left the office that night, I couldn't help but smile. Not because of the opportunity Daniel had offered, though that certainly played a role. But because I had finally reached a point where I didn't need anyone's validation to know that I was enough. I had proven it to myself. The night of the gala arrived in a blur of anticipation and nerves. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking into something monumental. Not just an event, but a culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had fought to become. As I stood in front of the mirror that evening, the woman staring back at me wasn't the same one who had walked away from Jason just a few months ago. She was stronger, more confident, and finally she was ready to step into the light. The dress I wore felt like it was made for me. Elegant, bold, and form-fitting in all the right places. It was the kind of dress that didn't need to scream for attention because it demanded it quietly, effortlessly. My makeup was subtle, but there was a glow to my skin now, a glow I hadn't seen in years. I felt beautiful not because of the way I looked, but because of the way I felt inside. The woman in the mirror wasn't defined by anyone else's opinions anymore. She was defined by her own strength, by her own journey, and most importantly by the choices she had made. I had worked so hard to get to this point, not just in my career but in my personal life. Every ounce of energy had been invested into rediscovering who I was, and now it was time for that work to pay off in the most unexpected way. Daniel had been by my side every step of the way, not as someone who simply admired my work, but as someone who saw my potential long before I did. We'd spent countless hours together, working late into the night, brainstorming strategies and solving problems, but tonight was different. Tonight he wasn't just my boss. He wasn't just the CEO of the company who had offered me opportunities. He was the man who had shown me what it meant to truly be seen and respected. When I entered the gala, Daniel's presence beside me felt like a quiet shield of confidence. His hand on my back, guiding me through the crowd, was a simple gesture, but it sent a surge of warmth through me. The atmosphere in the room was electric, the sound of laughter and soft chatter filling the air, but it felt as though in that moment all the noise faded away. I was in a world of my own, walking beside someone who understood my journey. We moved through the crowd, exchanging polite nods with colleagues and clients, but my attention kept drifting to the one person who had once been my everything, Jason. I hadn't seen him yet, but I knew he was here, somewhere in the sea of tuxedos and elegant gowns. And as much as I tried to push the thought away, I couldn't deny the part of me that wondered what he would think when he saw me now. It didn't take long for Jason to appear, his eyes locking onto mine from across the room. The moment our gazes met, the air seemed to shift. His eyes widened in disbelief, and for a split second, I saw something I hadn't expected: regret. But it was fleeting, and just as quickly as it appeared, it was replaced by a look of confusion, followed by a hint of anger. Daniel, sensing the tension, subtly squeezed my hand, a silent reassurance that he was here with me. His presence grounded me, and in that moment I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before: power. I took a deep breath, standing taller than I ever had before. This was the moment. Jason's opinion didn't matter anymore. His judgment of me, his cruelty, none of it mattered. What mattered was the woman standing before him now, the woman who had overcome so much to get to this point. I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need anyone to validate me. I had done this for myself. We walked across the room, the chatter around us a dull hum as I focused on Jason's stunned expression. His eyes darted between me and Daniel, clearly not understanding what was happening. But I didn't owe him an explanation. I didn't owe him anything. Not anymore. As we approached him, I could see the confusion deepening on Jason's face. He seemed at a loss for words, his usual bravado faltering for the first time since I'd known him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His jaw tightened as he looked between me and Daniel, and I couldn't help but notice the flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He was stunned. He was speechless. "Claire," he finally managed, his voice thick with disbelief, "I didn't expect to see you here." I couldn't help the slight smile that tugged at my lips. It wasn't a smile of sympathy or regret. It was the kind of smile that came with the realization that I had finally taken control of my own story. "I'm sure you didn't," I replied coolly, my voice steady and calm. "But here I am." I saw the moment Jason's ego cracked. His face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment as he looked at me, his eyes darting to Daniel for a split second before quickly returning to me. The words he had used to mock me, the cruel laughter he had shared with his friends, it was all out in the open now. There was no hiding behind his bravado. No pretending he hadn't tried to break me. Daniel stood beside me, his presence unyielding, offering no judgment, only support. His hand subtly rested on my lower back, a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. In that moment I felt a deep sense of gratitude toward him. Not just for his support tonight, but for everything he had done in helping me rediscover my worth. I wasn't just the woman Jason had mocked. I was a woman with strength, with purpose, and with a future of my own making. Jason cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable in my presence. "I didn't expect this." His words were halting, stumbling, as though he couldn't quite grasp what had just unfolded in front of him. "You've changed." "Yes, I have," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "But not in the way you think. You don't get to define who I am anymore." For a moment there was silence between us, and in that silence I felt a profound shift. I wasn't just confronting Jason. I wasn't just showing him that I was no longer the woman he had belittled. I was showing myself that I had outgrown him, that I had grown beyond the woman who had stayed silent, who had accepted his ridicule. The woman I was now, she was strong, she was independent, and she was free. Daniel, sensing the tension, placed a hand on my arm, gently guiding me forward. "Let's go," he said softly. His voice was steady, warm, and it felt like an anchor in the storm of emotions that had swirled between Jason and me. With a final glance at Jason, I turned my back on him and followed Daniel through the crowd. I didn't need to see Jason's face anymore. I didn't need to watch his ego crumble before me. What mattered was that I was finally walking away from the past, leaving behind the man who had never seen my worth. And as we made our way to the dance floor, hand in hand, I knew that I had truly transformed, not just in body but in spirit. The woman who had once been afraid to speak up, to stand tall, had finally found her voice. And no one, not even Jason, could ever take that away from me again. The night at the gala had been everything I needed it to be and more. As the music continued to play and the laughter and chatter filled the air, I realized something profound about myself. I wasn't just walking away from Jason that night. I was walking away from a past that had once defined me, from the version of myself that had stayed silent, that had accepted cruelty, and that had felt inadequate because of someone else's perception. I was walking into a future where I was my own validation, my own strength, and my own worth. As the evening wound down, Daniel and I stepped outside the grand venue into the cool night air. The stars above were clear and bright, and the streets buzzed with the quiet hum of the city settling into its night rhythm. But it was as if, in that moment, time had slowed down just for me. Everything felt so right. The world didn't feel like it was moving too fast anymore. It felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. Daniel walked beside me, his presence a steady and calming force. He hadn't said much after the confrontation with Jason, but the way he had stayed by my side, his silent support, spoke volumes. He had never once made me feel anything less than capable, never once made me feel like I needed to explain myself. In his quiet way, he had shown me the kind of respect I hadn't realized I deserved until now. "I'm proud of you," Daniel said as we walked along the cobblestone streets, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. I glanced at him, meeting his gaze for the briefest of moments before looking away. I felt something stir in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time, a deep sense of gratitude. "You don't have to say that," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. "But thank you." He chuckled softly. "I'm saying it because I mean it. You're stronger than you realize, Claire." I smiled, the warmth in my chest spreading out, filling the spaces that had once been hollow with doubt and pain. It wasn't about the praise, though. It was about the way he saw me. Not just the exterior, not just the polished version that everyone expected to see. It was the real me, the one who had fought through years of self-doubt, through the judgment of others, and who had finally come out the other side. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel's voice interrupted my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. I nodded, curious. "What did it feel like seeing Jason's face when you walked in tonight? I mean, I've seen a lot of people react to certain situations, but that was different." I took a deep breath, the memory of Jason's stunned expression flashing in my mind. It wasn't anger or pride I had felt in that moment, but something much simpler. A sense of freedom. It felt like I had taken back everything I'd ever given him, I said softly. Every piece of myself that I let him chip away at. I didn't need to say anything to him. He could see it in my face, in the way I held myself. I'm not that person anymore. I'm not someone who allows others to define me. Daniel nodded, his lips curling into a gentle smile. That's the person I see every day. We continued walking, the sound of our footsteps blending with the distant hum of the city. As we passed beneath the streetlights, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm settle over me. My heart wasn't racing anymore. The adrenaline of the night had faded, leaving behind a quiet confidence that I had never known before. "Claire," Daniel said, his voice suddenly a bit more serious, "I know tonight was about reclaiming your strength, but I also want you to know something." He paused for a moment, his words hanging in the air, heavy with meaning. "I've watched you grow over the past few months. Not just in your work but in yourself. I've seen the changes, how you've stepped into who you truly are, and I have to say, I'm impressed. I think you've already won." I stopped walking for a moment, looking at him as his words sank in. It wasn't about a competition. It wasn't about winning in the way we'd always been taught. But the meaning behind his words, what he was truly saying, was about something more. I wasn't just standing in front of him as the woman who had walked away from a toxic relationship. I was standing in front of him as the woman who had learned to love herself. Not because of someone else's validation. Not because of what anyone else thought of me. But because I had finally discovered my own worth. "I never thought I could get here," I said quietly, my voice breaking the silence. "I never thought I could feel this free." "You've always had it in you," Daniel replied, his tone soft but certain. "Sometimes it just takes a little time, and the right kind of support, to help you see it." For a long while we didn't speak. We just walked side by side, each step forward a step further into a new life. A life that felt fully mine, one that was built on my terms. The next few weeks passed in a blur of changes, both big and small. At work, I took on new challenges, tasks that I had once shied away from. I was no longer intimidated by the expectations placed upon me. I no longer worried about falling short. With every task I completed, every goal I reached, I felt a piece of the old, insecure version of me fade away. But it wasn't just my career that flourished. I began to realize that my personal growth was just as important, maybe even more so. I spent more time doing the things that made me happy, things I had neglected for years. I picked up hobbies I had long forgotten about, reconnected with old friends, and began to enjoy the quiet moments, the ones where I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. One afternoon, as I was finishing up some work in my office, I received a message from Jason. It had been a while since I'd heard from him and I wasn't sure what to expect. The message was brief, but it was enough to make my heart stop for a moment. "I made a mistake," it read. "I never should have treated you that way. I'm sorry." I stared at the message, unsure of how to feel. For a second, the old part of me, the part that had once been desperate for his approval, wanted to reply, to explain everything, to hear him say something that would make me feel better about the way he had treated me. But then I stopped myself. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need anything from him anymore. With a deep breath, I deleted the message. It was a symbol, I realized, of how far I had come. I didn't need his closure. I had my own. That was the real revenge. Not the humiliation, not the confrontation, but the quiet, steady transformation that had taken place within me. I had finally taken control of my life, and that was worth more than any apology or acknowledgement from someone who had never truly understood me. In the end, I didn't need Jason to see my worth. I already did. And that, I realized, was the most powerful thing of all.